Welcome to the Spaceship Earth with me, Dan Burgess. This is episode 5, coming live from the ocean. Not in the ocean, but sort of by the ocean. Last week it was in the woods in Somerset, and today I'm on a beach in Nicaragua on the Pacific coast. It was a bit of a trek to get here, but I'm here, and it's very hot, and it's quite hard to describe. It's pretty awesome. Anyway, in this episode I'm going to be spontaneously riffing around the ocean, and it's another kind of short experiment in I'm not interviewing a guest this week, or probably next week or the week after, because I'm travelling, but the guests are being lined up, so they're coming back, so fear not, you won't have to always listen to me rambling on. But anyway, this episode is going to be it's going to be water themed, and actually I found out this morning, which is even better, it's actually hashtag World Water Day today. Anyway, more about that later. First off, I wanted to share a little story, because this something really cosmic and amazing I thought happened last week when I was travelling on Saturday. Flew into San Jose in Costa Rica, and I checked my feeds, and I'd been on the plane for 11 hours and obviously getting a bit twitchy, like what's going on the internet, and I'd had a kind of a couple of ping basically on Instagram from an amazing chap called Millz, who's the founder of this extraordinary company called Us2, and he had pinged me because he'd been referencing me and this Spaceship Earth podcast in his podcast, which I thought was pretty amazing, considering I don't know, it's just quite nice, right? But there's more to the story, which is what's quite nice. So I checked it out. I got to the hotel. I listened to this episode, and the thing is, I have been listening to Millz's podcasts for the last couple of weeks, and I've been really enjoying them, and I think what he's doing is a lot of it's really connecting with me, and so. Why am I telling this story? Well, I'm sharing it because there's a couple of things really which I thought were just really interesting. First thing is that my wife Seema had told me about Millz's podcast, and she I think she'd met Millz actually a year or two ago at a conference or something swanky in Cannes, I think it was. Anyway, she'd been listening to his podcast. She's particularly interested in getting her running practice going, so she's been. And one of the things Millz is doing is he's training to do ultras, and is a big runner, and so she'd been listening to his podcast, and then she said to me, "Oh, you should listen. You should listen to his podcast." I was like, I'm on a beach, as you can probably tell. There's waves. There's also, I don't know what that was, motorbike. Anyway. I lost myself. Yes, so she said you should listen to his podcast. So I started listening to his podcast, and then, so what was interesting, then he has discovered my podcast, and he discovered mine through a kind of just a random trail of tweets and things on Saturday, which led him to my podcast. So I love the way the cosmos works, and that's why I wanted to mention it, because it was quite meta. I've been listening to his stuff, and then he somehow stumbled across my podcast. And the last thing I wanted to mention on that is, you should just check out his podcast. It's called JFDI, which I believe stands for Just Effing Do It. And what's awesome about what Millz is doing, and he's doing lots of awesome things, but the thing that really connected with me is the spirit of what he's doing, which is just do it. Just like, make podcasts, do things. If you've got an idea, just try and do it, or get the thoughts out of your head. And I've been really guilty, I'm always really guilty of overthinking stuff, or keeping things locked in, and not getting things out into the world. And it's actually one of my big things at the start of this year was to get things out into the world faster, which is a little bit what the Spaceship Earth is all about for me. It's more of a living inquiry of how to get things that are in my head and things I'm feeling and understanding and exploring, how to get them out quickly. And actually, if stuff happens, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't really matter. It's out there. And so I found that riff that he's on has been very inspiring and encouraging to me. And the final thing I want to add to this little story is, which connects also to, actually quite strongly to, I think, part of what I'm exploring through Spaceship Earth is what I would call, being more life-centered. And I think what I love about Millz's exploration is this idea of spontaneity and expression, being whatever in that moment, what is being called for, whatever you're feeling, of just getting it out. And I think there's something, very much that connects with how I think wider life works beyond the human world. I think, the sort of living, the non-human world is generally, as far as I can understand, it's spontaneously itself. This wave has just crashed in front of me, and it was different to the wave before, and it hit, and spray was taken away by the wind, and everything just kind of just did what it needed to do right then. I didn't get a sense that was being planned, but or overly thought about. It just kind of happened, and I'm sitting under this tree, which is it's different to the tree next to it, because it's just kind of growing in the way it seems to want to grow, and that's kind of different, and it looks, it's just kind of quite, it's expressive. It's just doing what it needs to do. And there's a bunch of these extraordinary, I love these birds, they're called blue jays. They're a sort of local bird, and they're just beautiful birds, and there's a load of them flying around, and they just got these crazy songs and calls that they make. And again, I'm sure there's intention, but there's something about the way they are which is just, I think they're just out there just doing their thing. They're just being spontaneous and honest, and so that's also really connected with me. And I think also there's a kind of generosity in that as well, which is the final thing I'd add, which I think, again, of course in life there is competition and whatever, but again, if you look, there's a lot of generosity that goes on in the non-human world. There's a lot of giving. There's a lot of things that are giving to support others. If you go back to if you look at soil, right, the earthworm is generally playing a big part in creating soil, and soil allows us plants to grow. It allows us to grow plants to grow for oxygen and for food, and so it doesn't ask for anything in return. It just does that. The same with obviously trees generating oxygen, the ocean as well, plankton. There's a lot of extraordinary generosity that's at play in order to create the conditions for life to exist. And so this idea of being more spontaneous with our thoughts and our connections and the things that we've discovered which we like and we want to tell others about, there's something really, there's something very life-centered in that. And so that's the last sort of thread, if you like, to this little story that I wanted to start with, which was sort of how, why that connection with Millz was for me quite cosmic. Anyway, moving on. I've always been quite drawn to the ocean. I've had my moments of scariness and fear of it, as I'm sure many people have, particularly when you've sort of been dragged into a rip or current, just, pulled you out as a kid or whatever. But there's something about also that power and unpredictability that I love, and I really actually, I'm drawn to. And there's something about that. And I think maybe I've been a lot about that around, because a lot of modern life is in quite sort of controlled spaces, environments where there isn't sort of that much uncertainty. You can sit down and fairly unlikely you're going to be sort of pulled out, or something's going to pop up, or something's going to crash over the head, or you're struggling for air. And while those are potentially can be unpleasant things as well, they can also be things that make you feel really alive. And also, for me, and I'm sure for many, many others of people, what they do is they put me on this kind of level of alertness and presence, which means I'm not thinking about loads of stuff, which is what I tend to do a lot of the time. Now I think this podcast could be a way to sort of get these thoughts out, but I'm always sort of processing lots and lots of information and lots of divergent thoughts. And when I get into the sea, that kind of stops. I'm there, I'm present, and I'm noticing. And because the sea is always changing, that's the other thing. Everything is always changing. Every wave is different. Everything's moving, and so there's this sense that you're in this environment. And you're kind of, I'm feeling kind of very present, and that actually then has this extraordinary sort of calming effect on me. I find that very, very kind of, again, energizing. It's a bit like the woods. It's a bit like going to the woods. A similar thing, but different, but similar. Yes, and anyway. The other thing about the ocean, as I've been discovering, is actually we are actually living on an ocean planet. We are, it's like 70% of the Earth is water. So actually we are a blue planet, as David Attenborough says. We're a blue planet. But that's quite profound if you think about it. And the Earth is actually much of our sort of living, life-giving systems of the Earth are regulated and driven by the ocean. So, did you know that? There's this great phrase from diver and ocean activist Sylvia Earle, marine biologist, which is every second breath comes from the ocean. No blue, no green. So every second breath, pretty much, I think, some scientists, I think there's there's some different kind of perspectives and views on exactly how much, but it's pretty much every second breath is generated by plankton out in the ocean. So the air we breathe on land, we are actually intimately connected to the ocean when we're on land. Now, I think that's pretty incredible, and I feel like maybe we don't know that. Or, maybe we do know that, but it seems to me, and at least the last 3 months I've been working on this stuff, that actually most of us don't know that, or we've forgotten it. The other thing, like weather systems, climate, most of our climate on land is driven by the ocean. It's determining what happens on land. So when it's pissing it down with rain, in wherever you live, and you're having a moan, that it's quite likely that rain has been produced and created and kind of driven over to you through the ocean system. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? And so basically, the ocean supports life on land, and as the more you get into this stuff, again, there's this great phrase. Actually, I've got it's this great sort of blue living heart. Is it the blue heart of the planet, the ocean? So anyway, what's blown my mind is this whole realization that actually, we start thinking about the ocean as a very different thing, not as this distant thing that we go on holiday and get fish from. And probably recently we've started to hear that's full of lots of plastic. But actually, it's this life-generating, life-giving system that is actually the thing that's actually creating a big part of life on Earth. And my friend Jack had this lovely way, actually, of saying, maybe we live in water world. Actually, it's water world. And my friend Zara, she actually had this other term, it's Earth on sea. Maybe Earth on sea is a better way of thinking about our relationship to the sea. So anyway, it's quite incredible when you start to understand how this stuff works, or you're reminded of it. And apparently, I don't know, were we taught about this at school? I remember when I was younger, actually a lot of this was I think Sting's fault. I remember, it was all about the rainforests. And all about protecting the rainforests, and they were the lungs of the planet. And I guess they are obviously a big part of the planet, but actually, it feels like the more we're learning is that the ocean and the oceans, or is it the ocean? Well, technically it's one ocean, but I guess Anyway, the ocean system is what is supporting life on Earth. So we are a watery world, and actually, this is where it gets quite interesting. When we're born, we're up to about 80% water in our bodies. I think as you become an adult, it drops to somewhere between 65-75% of we are made of water. The brain is, I think, about 80% water. It's quite radical, really, when you start to think that actually maybe we are much more beings of water than perhaps we've imagined, because as we've gone into land, we've sort of we've forgotten that connection. Anyway, and I'm currently reading a book. I've been trying to read for months, but now I'm trying to actually get it finished, which is called Blue Mind, and it's written by an amazing chap called Wallace J. Nichols, who's a marine biologist, and then he's written this book called Blue Mind, and the title is The Surprising Science That Shows How Being Near, In, On or Underwater Can Make You Happier, Healthier, More Connected and Better at What You Do. So that's quite that got me, and I've been digging into it, and it's a fascinating read. And if you have a little search for some of his work, #Blue Mind, and I think he's got a Blue Mind conference, but it's basically looking at how water impacts us as human beings, and how it affects us our health and well-being, which is really interesting. And it's not just the sea. This can be rivers, lakes, any kind of waterways. I'm not sure puddles. I'm not sure if they've looked at the increase in well-being being surrounded by puddles, but maybe that's true as well. But generally, the old idea of water and blue, and there's tons of really interesting stuff that's being researched and written about our relationship to the water. And I definitely do. Like, if I come out from a surf, like, I am like, I don't care. I'm sort of, might have been like beaten up, battered, might have nearly drowned. But when I come out, I'm like, I'm just zoned and chilled, and I just feel happy, and there's no anxiety. Don't feel stressed. I have lots of clarity, and I think there's, as I said, there's something about being in an environment like the ocean, particularly where where there is so much going on that you can't control and it is unpredictable, that puts you into this zone of potential, actually, because you don't really know, so therefore you're kind of alert, but in a kind of a really interesting way. And it also makes me think about edges. I don't know, I guess, when you're on the edge of the ocean and when you're in, again, it's these edges of what we kind of know and edges of what we don't know. And again, there's something interesting, something very fertile about edges. So water, oceans, and World Water Day. It's quite interesting actually being in Nicaragua where we are here, because also it's extraordinarily hot. I'm actually sitting under a little tree on the beach, and there's no one on the beach because it's literally it's frying right now, and there's a big wind, so it's blowing out all the waves, so the surf's not really happening. That's just why I thought I'd do the podcast. But actually, where we are, again, it's pretty remote. There's not much. Doesn't appear to be that many people here, and if you want, the things that we take for granted, water and food and all these things, they're harder to find. So there's not much around here. You'd have to travel about an hour to get to a supermarket. So we're sort of like we're eating a lot of rice and beans, which is I kind of like. I like rice and beans, but it makes you realise when you're eating them for breakfast for the fourth day that these kind of access to kind of stuff that we have in parts of our lives and some parts of the world, and it's just sometimes, at least my own person, is realising just that gratitude to have access to all these things, because when you're without, you realise it's a different world. But it's I'm still happy. I mean, rice and beans is making me happy, but things like water, you can't drink out the taps, and in flushing you've got to be really careful, and you can't put anything down the loo at all. And I don't know, you just, in some ways, you're kind of like, you're sort of stripped of a lot of things that you take for granted, but there's something quite interesting, I personally find, in being reminded of limits and scarcity, and that you have to kind of adapt. I think that's what really that's about, that there are limits to everything. And if you think of the Spaceship Earth is really this idea that there are limits to resources, there are limits in the systems, what a system can take, and there's always abilities to regenerate. So, for instance, like the ocean, the way we've been kind of fishing it, like industrialized, industrial scale fishing, which literally is like, it's like taking a sort of like you look at some of this bottom-based kind of trawlers where they're literally like scraping the ocean floor. You're literally like bulldozing. So if the stuff was happening on land, it would be like kind of bulldozers just taking out kind of trees and fields and birds and everything, just to try and capture a small bit of protein. Limits. If you keep doing that, which is what we're doing, then the ocean will struggle to regenerate. And we've always seen the oceans as this sort of vast, untouchable thing that kind of like we can just sort of do what we want. You can just chuck stuff in it and chuck stuff into our cities that goes into the kind of waterways and rivers, and obviously goes out to the ocean. Or we can just pull as much fish out of it as we like. Or we can develop as much coastline as we like. Or whatever we want to do, we just do it. But of course you can't. What we're realising now is that again, because it's a living system, and we're starting to impact its ability to regenerate. The flip side of all that is that the ocean has this extraordinary ability to regenerate. So if you protect areas of it quite quickly, it can regenerate very, very fast if you leave it alone and let it get back to its more natural way of existing. And again, it's complex once you get into this, but also fascinating. So like food, for instance, you can, if you regenerate parts of the ocean, you will be able to create far more bigger sources of sustainable protein for humans than you would if you were trying to create that level of protein from land. So again, we're sort of moving into this time and space where we need to be looking at things, systems again, looking at ocean and land as a system, not going, well, we live on land and let's just carve it all up and create, let's just farm livestock and create biofuels, No, we have to look at this interconnected system of water and land and think, well, how do you best design a system that can create the conditions and the needs for 7 billion plus of us? Complicated, but also quite exciting, I think, as well. As we start, as this knowledge appears. But anyway, I find that kind of fascinating that the ocean has this extraordinary potential, as I say, to regenerate itself way faster than kind of systems on land do. So I think there's something, really exciting as well when we think about the kind of limits and challenges that are ahead, but also the possibilities when we start to sort of think and design in this more life-centered way. Yeah, it's actually looking like the wind's dropped. It's looking a bit glassy. It actually might be sort of surfs up conditions quite soon, so I might have to come to a close in the next few minutes. The other thing, I guess, about water has made me think a lot. Again, is about rivers. So in Britain, anyway. We are actually, we have sort of rivers and waterways and streams kind of all around us, all under us, and of course they all lead to the ocean. So we are actually way more connected to the ocean than we imagine, but we just maybe again we don't see it. But all these waterways and rivers are sort of are connecting us into the ocean or out to these kind of saltwater, freshwater, edges and. What's going on there? But anyway, so that's kind of interesting. So think about the ocean next time you see your river, and actually that just on the sort of again on this whole sort of pollution. No, ocean plastic pollution is not really coming because we're just going out to the beach and chucking loads of rubbish on it, or ships are dumping stuff, which of course they all are, but actually. Most of the pollution, source of the pollution is cities, it's urban populations, and the way that we're, we're not managing our waste streams at all. And, they're going into kind of sewer systems and overflows and blowing off building sites and landfill and all this kind of stuff. So, the source of the problem is us city-based humans, and how we live and the impacts and decisions we make there are what's driving a lot of what we're seeing out in the ocean right now. So there you have it. And just the last thing I wanted to just riff on, which was someone's actually started a drill. There you go. That's just taken me away from my beautiful ocean setup. They're building something behind the beach, of course. But yeah, it's like so Sylvia Earle, who talks about the ocean as it's getting really windy. I don't know if you can hear that. Just diving under a tree. So she talks a lot about this idea of the ocean being the blue heart of the planet, which I love. And actually currently, like, we only protect, I think, like marine protected areas, we protect, I think, around something like only 7% of the ocean is protected. So you think, she has this, if you think about, if it is our heart, if it is the thing that's driving all the life-giving systems of our planet being driven by the ocean, it's this great big blue heart, and yet we're only protecting 7% of it. It's like, would you only ever protect 7% of your heart? Like, that vital organ. So it's such an interesting shift to think about. So there we go. That's World Water Day. Some watery thoughts from me and the Spaceship Earth here live from the beach in Nicaragua. I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been good for me just to get this stuff out. As ever, I would love any feedback, thoughts. If any of this is connected with you, you can get me Dan at danburgess.earth or on Twitter at dansolos. at Dan Solo, and on Instagram at Dan Solo. Oh, Dan Solo's got it wrong around. Basically at Dan Solo. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Anything. And as I say, my next guests have been lined up, so I'll be getting those interviews done in the next couple of weeks. I'm on the road, probably going to drop another podcast in the next week or so from Costa Rica. But yeah, wishing you a very sort of watery water world day. I just think I might, when I'm going to go back later and try and upload this. I've got very dodgy Wi-Fi, so it may not actually go up today on World War Today, and it might actually be later in the week when we're travelling into Costa Rica, but who knows? I'll try. But I was just thinking, I might put a tune on the end of this podcast, a kind of watery flavoured themed song, just to kind of express my big love for the ocean and water generally, and all things watery. So I don't know what, but I'm going to drop something. So I'll credit it in the credits, and hopefully it'll be a bit, from sort of DJ, so it's a bit more kind of Peterson versus Partridge. But anyway, I hope you enjoy. Take it easy. Remember, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're all crew. Until next time, peace and out.